Welcome to the Midlife Men podcast with me, Philip Briscoe. My guest today is John Ryan. John's an award-winning comedian. His shows on the comedy circuit are highly acclaimed, but it's his work in men's mental health that has also won him awards, including his work with the army and in prisons. He's even had a research paper published in the Journal of Social Psychiatry and Psychiatric Epidemiology on how comedy can boost mental health. Let's start by talking a bit about your background then and how you got into comedy, and then how that morphed into comedy in the context of mental health.
So I'm from a big Irish family. Both my parents came over here in the early 60s, I think it was. And stereotypically, in most Irish households, you either learn to sing, do Irish dancing, play some sort of musical instrument, or tell a joke. So there was no way I was doing Irish dancing. So that kind of the humour, that zest for life that the French called joie de vivre, we call having the crack. So the crack's good. And there's always, people around the house telling stories, that kind of stuff. So that kind of moulded my personality somewhat. Also, I was brought up in Hackney. So very, very diverse community. My next door neighbour and best mate was Indian. My other best mate was from a Jamaican family. So I learned that other cultures spoke different ways, different accents, different flavours, different ways of dealing with stuff. So from a very early age, I was always fascinated by the fact that when we had a family party, it would descend into drinking, fighting, singing and making up. Whereas when Ojit or Junior had a party, it was all just like, I'm like, are your uncles not going to fight? So I was aware of the way there's different ways of dealing with life and the pressures of life. When I left school, I worked in construction. My dad was a builder, so we were just expected to be builders. But it was too cold for me. I just couldn't cope with it. So I did evening classes, got some A-levels, got a degree, and then went to work in community care for 10 years. And that was fantastic. I loved that job. I worked 3 12-hour shifts a week, mainly with people who were elderly, frail, vulnerable. So I saw a lot of the ex-Carry-On stars, for example. When they retired, they went into a home that was run by, they went into the community, and we were very often the last people they spent their time with. And it fascinated me to think that you could be so popular and successful and yet then fall on hard times and end up in a one-bedroom flat in Earl's Court. I loved my job, really, really loved it. But we then had a boss came in who wanted to shake things up and have us work 9 to 5, Monday to Friday. I had young kids. I liked working 3 12-hour shifts a week. It meant I could be a hands-on dad. So I thought, what else can I do? I thought about, when I was at university, I thought about being a teacher. I like being around kids. I like that kind of non-judgmental attitude that they have. So I used to always tell my younger siblings stories when they were kids, and then I told my own kids stories. And I had this collection of stories. Someone said, look, if you work for the council, no one's going to look at them. If you did stand-up comedy, you get a performing CV, people would look at your work. So I took a bit of redundancy, applied around all over the place, chatted to people, did some gigs, and after 7 weeks got my first television writing contract. I actually got onto Teletubbies because I met someone and told them my story. Then I moved on to other kids' things, and then I thought, well, as my kids are getting older, you got to be in that zone, really. If you're not around young kids, you can't understand them. I was very aware from a young age that my relatives didn't live long, especially the men. And they didn't talk about problems that they had in their life. They used to fight a lot, used to drink, smoke. And again, going to one of Junior's uncle's funerals, and the guy was like 95, and saying to my mum, black people can live to they're 95, mum. And she went, well, that's right, but they're not Irish. And so it's just a thing. I just thought we expired at 60. So I told someone that story on stage, and they laughed. And I thought, well, actually, a lot of the time when I'm doing my comedy now, these little gems I'm putting in will people kind of resonate with. An amazing guy called Jeff Rowe at the Leicester Comedy Festival wanted someone to do a project on men's health, just going into places, just to talk to guys about their health. So I applied, I was successful, put a show together, and it was called Hurt Until It Laughs. So we went into like Afro-Caribbean Centre, Islamic Centre, Jewish Centre, Gay and Lesbian Centre, an Irish Centre, all working men's clubs. And it sort of seemed to me, apparently, it doesn't matter where you're from, it's your gender that seemed to be the main driving factor in your demise. someone would then go, oh, you're the guy who won the award for that show and you did that project. Could you do the same thing about depression and anxiety? Or could you do the same thing about suicide awareness? Can you do the same thing about mental health in kids? Then when I was working with the military, like, well, could you do the same thing for PTSD with squaddies? And so now I often get a call. Last week I had a call. Someone wants me to do a project on the mental health of the Irish travelling community. Well, yeah, I'll be like, of course. And it all comes from the same starting template of, I think comedy, and my belief in comedy is it should be inclusive and bring people together. So I'm not one of these acerbic kind of, where are you from? Name of town. Oh, that's a bit rubbish, isn't it? Not one of them ones at all. Yeah, and then because I have this kind of academic background, this kind of very colourful upbringing, and this experience of working around frail and vulnerable people, just seemed natural for it all to come together. I've got no lived experience myself of any mental health problems. Although my mum was clinically depressed, my sisters have been in and out of depression all their lives. My brother gets a bit of anxiety. I probably do, but I don't recognise it, or it doesn't manifest in a way that is kind of restrictive.
When you're asked to put something together for a particular group of people, particular community, like you said, PTSD in the army, with squaddies, how do you go about that? Do you actually go and meet with people who you're going to be performing to? How do you understand how to align your set, if you like, with something that's going to actually resonate with them?
So what you do is the template is upbeat, inclusive, and mischief, right? There's your template right there. Now, if you think that's your flour, milk, and eggs, so you can turn it into a souffle, a cake, pancakes, bread. There's a whole, once you've got that core basic stuff, right? That comes back to my dad saying to me, if you've got a hammer, a screwdriver, and a good pair of boots, you'll always have work. So that's my toolkit. I've got no experience of depression and anxiety myself, like I said. So when I was asked to do that project, I then got groups of mates together who lived with it and lived with it. So I asked them how it feels and what it's like. And then from their stories, I will try and involve them. Do you want to come and do a bit of a poem or a story or a bit of comedy itself or sing or whatever? And if they didn't want to, then I would do it. We did a suicide awareness project. I can honestly say I've never had any suicidal thoughts yet. I don't know what the future's got in store for me. So I've got a mate who tried to take his own life. He was pretty rubbish at it because he tried about 5 times. And so I just made you smile with a little funny off-the-cuff remark about suicide. Very heavy subject. Yeah, and then I'll go, once I've got their stories, I then go and talk to experts because I don't want to get it wrong. I don't want to say it wrong. I don't diagnose. I don't prescribe. I'm not a practitioner. I'll just try to shed light on your story so that other people can maybe see it.
And do you find there is humour everywhere? So I interview a lot of men who have suffered from very serious mental health challenges and faced lots of different battles. But with most of them, they tell me their story, there's always humour in there. You could call it blitz humour. And I'm sorry for my US audience who aren't getting all of the references today. A lot of them are kind of very British. But in terms of humour, do you see that when talking to people who do suffer from mental health?
I believe that humour is a coping strategy. It's an emotion, right? And it's there, it bonds us. When a baby smiles, we smile back. When a baby laughs, we laugh. But as we get older, we stop smiling and laughing. And so I'm just trying to reconnect people with like that kind of inner child, if you like. People who are facing difficulties. Classic one, what I was mentioning to you before the podcast, one of my best mates growing up was a Jewish guy. Jewish humour is phenomenal. And some of the jokes and stories where they portray themselves, they're making light of a difficult situation. That gallows ghetto humour very often gets you through it. Same with the military, black humour, dark humour, ghetto humour. I was at an uncle's funeral. He'd had his legs amputated and the place was packed, more people there than should have been there. And then we realised that they'd been betting on what size the coffin would be. Will we have a child's coffin or a full-size adult one with a bit of padding down the bottom? And it's there. You with me? And we're laughing. Well, cab driver came to pick us up and thought he was at the wrong place. Thought he was at a funeral. We're all singing, dancing and laughing. But it's that celebrating life, isn't it?
Do you think it's easier then to reach people, especially people who are lost or haven't, realised that don't know what to do about the challenges they're facing? Do you find that it's easy to reach them if you can get people to laugh? Is it more of a common denominator to reach people who perhaps previously been unreachable?
If I can put my little academic hat on for a moment, it's got to be contextual, it's got to be appropriate, and it's got to be situational, all right? And for everyone else, it's got to be something that's not going to get you punched. So you can you can joke about anything, right? But it's got to be, for my template, has to be positive, has to be. And once you can make people laugh, you can make them listen. Once you got their attention, then you can get your message across. Chaplin used to say that laughter and humour take the vicious edge off of life.
And I guess it's something that unites all of us. Most people do like to have a laugh. And just because you are, even if you're living under the darkest cloud of depression, I guess everybody will still laugh from time to time.
Because it's an emotion, it's a reaction, right? And it's a cathartic and it's a bonding thing as well. So it's very important that we recognise it as a valid form of expression, because I was always being told, get that grin off your face, or you have to make a joke out of everything. No, but sometimes people choose to. There's a lot of this. Let me just separate something out. I'm not a comedian, okay? Comedians, the very good ones, tend to have a lot of angst, self-doubt, and inability to connect with people. They tend to suffer a lot with anxiety, depression, and self-doubt, okay? They get the validation from an audience, then they very often go home to an empty flat, empty house, or a friendless life. I've got friends, I've got a partner I love to bits. I'm happier sat in the garden looking at trees than I am standing on stage to 1,000 people. It just happens that my skill set means I can do that on stage to 1,000 people. So I'm not coming at it as a comedian. I'm coming at it as your mate. And look, let's see this. People often comment when they watch me doing comedy that it's very accessible. And there's a reason for that. I will never make jokes about sexual abuse, rape, or racism, that's not me. It's just not in my nature, okay? Most comedians, they hang out with other comedians and want to go, I've got a really great idea for a joke. It's about a bloke assaulting a woman. And one of the other comics will go, no, make it a kid. Oh, no, make it a kid in a wheelchair. Ha, 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 ha. If I said to my mates, I've got a really good idea for a joke about assaulting a woman, I'll get punched. It's not in my conversational sphere. It's not in my circle. So consequently, one of the problems I have is that when I'm running a project, it's really hard to get people to work on it with me because they're going to say something for the laugh.
When you're on the comedy circuit, so you've got John Ryan who's going and working with different communities, and then you've got John Ryan who's on the comedy circuit doing shows. How do they differ? Do you treat those differently in terms of your audience?
Very differently. However, same template. It's my same milk, flour, eggs. It's the same. It's upbeat, it's inclusive, it's mischievous. So I don't I'm not going to make any jokes about what's going on in Ukraine or Gaza at the moment. I think it's inappropriate. However, that's not to say that you can't, but it don't sit well with me. I will make jokes though about Brexit, but in terms of making it relatable, right? So for the Americans, Britain was part of a big European pact. Then we left that pact. And it's not any difference really to any of us, because for most British men, we were never in charge of finance, foreign policy, economics anyway. It was always your partner. You see, again, so I've taken a complicated subject and made it accessible. Now we could open that out and make it run.
So when you're, for example, let's take the example of prisons. So the work that you've done going into prisons, what's your brief there? What are you going in to try and achieve?
So with the prison project, again, I was approached because of my background, because, a comedian, I've got this academic fallback. Also, where I was brought up was very rough. A lot of my friends went to prison for all sorts of crime, ranging from theft, burglary to murder. So I don't judge. I don't judge people anyway. So going into prisons, I've not gone in there as a white middle class, do-gooding, liberal, I'm here to save the world. I've got in there knowing that these guys haven't always committed crimes because they had no choice, man. That was an active choice they took, right? So first of all, I'm kind of getting where they're coming from. But then what happens is you got to understand that most people in prison, whatever your political views are, most people in prison are barely educated, have got some form of mental health problem already going in. A lot of them raised in care, a lot of them been through abusive families. Now we can either then look at the causes or look at the excuses, but ultimately we've got to look at the people that are in there. And my take on it was, I've got kids that I love, friends that I love, and you seem like a nice man, Philip. Let me tell you, you go down a pub tonight, you have one drink too many, hit a cyclist, kill him, you'll go to prison, mate, right? And even though you're well-rounded, successful, financially secured, emotionally secure, trust me, within 48 to 72 hours, you'll be looking at taking your own life. I would put money on it, because they're horrible places. They are full of unremitting misery. However, some people go, well, don't commit the crime. Other people will say, well, it's not their fault, or whatever. My thing then was to go into these situations and say to the guys, you're going to have these feelings. And when their feelings start to come, you got to do something about it straight away. Talk to someone, seek help, look out for the vulnerable and the weak, because you'll need someone to look out for you.
And so I guess, as you said, you've got your same basic ingredients, and you're just applying it then to the whatever community or whatever objective you're trying to achieve. And you talked a little bit about your academic background. You talked about this research paper in the introduction, but perhaps you could talk a bit more about that. What drove you to write it? What did you achieve through it?
So I got invited to entertain the troops, because you get invited. I was brought up in a pro-IRA, anti-British household. And back in the 80s, it wasn't easy being part of the Irish community. A lot of anger, a lot of hatred, a lot of hostility. But we were born here. And I remember saying to my mum, look, I've been asked to entertain the troops. And she was like, well, why would you want to do that? I said, well, because I'm British, and this is Britain. This is where we live. This is where, someone invades us. I'm going to go and fight them. I'm not going to pop back to Ireland, are we? So her take on it was, well, I guess if Gerry Adams can sit down with Ian Paisley, you can go and entertain British soldiers, right? And then when I went to entertain them, I was struck by, first of all, how young they were, how working class they were, and how that they had a sense of identity and belief that I'd not met people like that before. So it was a learning thing for me. I've got a master's in health. I've got a degree in social science, a degree in trade union studies. So I can put an academic piece of paper together. We were looking at ways to just try and find a way to identify and help guys that have PTSD to just talk about it. My kind of writing partner, business partner, Maya Twaziki, was a health professional. So we worked very closely on that with the research unit at King's College London. And it was interesting watching Maya, who had seen me doing a project on suicide awareness and a project on anxiety and depression. I said to her before we went in, look, what I do today is going to be different to what I've done before, so don't freak out. And then after about 5 minutes, I could see her with her head in her hands at the back of the room going, oh my good God. Because I was speaking on the squaddy level. And again, using my toolkit to come down to them, to bring them together. And the outcome was really positive. It did show that humour worked as a way of getting them to acknowledge and recognise. But the problem that we identified as well was that it wasn't so much about, we think of PTSD where you see your mate getting shot and you have nightmares. That's not what happens. What happens is you leave the army and suddenly you're on your own in Civvy Street with people who don't understand you, no support network, and you're judged and you have adjustment issues. So there was something statistic, I don't want to be misquoted, but the statistics for ex-military personnel with PTSD was lower than middle-aged women, because middle-aged women are being repeatedly tapped their whole lives, whereas these lads just getting it for 5 years that they're in service. And the same for men who would get divorced. PTSD for men who get divorced. You don't see your kids, you lose your family, lose your friends, lose her family and friends. So it's a huge area.
That's interesting, isn't it? Because that's not particularly well known, is it? You wouldn't necessarily attribute PTSD to anyone outside of someone that had a career in something like the army or bomb disposal or something like that.
You think about it. If you're a lad, you're a single lad, you've got loads of mates, loads and loads of mates. Okay, then you meet a girl, and I'm only talking in terms of heterosexual relationships here. I'm not overly sure how it works with the gay community, but hey, I'm up for learning, right? You meet a girl, and then slowly you notice that all your friends are no longer those lads. They're now the husbands of her friends. You go, hang on. Well, we're having a barbecue. Can I invite Dave? No, Dave's an animal. I don't live in my house. Oh, okay. But here's Charles. Charles is a nice man. He's an accountant. Giles is boring, but he's her friend's husband. Then you and the missus split up, and you've got no friends. You're on your own. And then that's the crunch. So one of the things wherever I work, I always say to the guys, make sure that you maintain friendship groups.
And that's one of the reasons, John, why I started this podcast, actually, because it's mental health obviously isn't just for midlife men, but actually I thought there was just a lack of voices or just things like podcasts, blogs, etc., that addressed the needs of midlife men, especially around this idea of loneliness and feeling a bit lost in your own life. So as you said, especially if you've had a family or career, you probably lost a lot of, when you were growing up, it's a completely different experience to what you have now. And then you can wake up age 45 and think, what happened here?
When I say to guys, one of the problems we've got with mental health, first of all, people have to understand it comes and goes. We're not talking about mental disability or mental incapacity. We're talking about a feeling of wellness, that balance kind of level that we all exist on, right? Depression and anxiety are normal and can be healthy emotions. When they get out of hand, it becomes a problem, right? Well, one of the issues we have is that we use these kind of insults and banter. Oh, here comes Crazy Dave. Oh, here comes Mad Mike. Well, actually, if he is mad, you're not really helping him, are you? So I very often will say to guys, who's got a crazy ex? And most men will go, yeah, I've got a crazy ex. And I met a guy once, never forget it. I've had 3. You've had 3 crazy exes? Yeah. Are you married now? He goes, no chance. Are they? You think, yeah. Well, so they were able, even though they're crazy, to find someone else and make and maintain a new healthy relationship, and you can't. Who do you think might have been the common problem with these 3 women? So we use the terms to just justify our bad treatment of women. Well, she's mad. She's not mad. She's just not a part of your nonsense no more, mate. But nobody tells you when you're 30, 25, you shouldn't really be doing that. I love Celtic, Glasgow Celtic Football Club for our Americans. Big soccer team, man. Hard tickets are gold dust. I was doing a conference in Glasgow and I was there Thursday, Friday. Thursday night went out with the lads. We had a great time. On the Friday night, my flight's at 7:30. Conference finishes at 3. It's next to the airport. We're having a beer in the bar. One of the guys says, look, yeah, you're a Celtic fan, right? I said, yeah, I can get you a ticket for tomorrow for the game if you want. I'm like, oh man, that'd be brilliant. He goes, it's not a problem, not a problem. I went, oh, the thing is though, my missus, her friend's daughter is got her first communion. Don't worry, just tell her. I said, no, it's big. She's really, really looking forward to it. She's bought an outfit, blah, 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 blah. Are you going to turn down tickets for the game? I went, yeah. What, are you under the thumb? Are you under the thumb? I went, yeah, probably. He goes, man, if my missus told me I couldn't go, blah, blah, blah. I said, yeah, but, with the greatest respect, mate, you're not going to sleep with me. My missus is, right? And that carries a lot of weight when I make my decisions, okay? So he goes, well, maybe you're always better looking than mine. Mine's a real beast of a girl. And I said, oh, okay. And everyone laughed. They're like, she's right there. Oh. I said, oh, man, I don't think that's really... I don't think it's a decent thing to be saying about your wife to strangers, but, who am I? I said to him, just out of interest, what does she work as? Oh, she's an art teacher. I said, she's an art... What, secondary school? Yeah. I said, do you know there's at least 50 boys every night touching themselves thinking about your wife, that fat beast, as you describe her? Why are they seeing her differently to you? And there's stunned silence at the bar. Absolutely, like, oh my God, can you say that? And I was a bit more graphic, right? I said, yeah, everyone used to fantasize about their art teacher. It's fact, right? Anyway, I went home. Probably about 6-7 months later, I'm at another conference, and he's there. And I said to him, hey, how's things? And he's like, he's a little bit cold. But afterwards, we're having a chat, and he goes, that day when you said that, I wanted to knock you out. I wanted to punch you in your face. But then I thought about it, and why have I stopped looking at her like she's a hot art teacher? I'm like, yeah, because we stopped. We stopped seeing the person we pursued and start seeing this nagging pain. Blah, 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 blah. And I said, well, you know what? Do you date her now? Do you do anything actively to try to... He goes, yeah. No, I could have got knocked out. But it didn't stop me. Maybe that's that comedic background or my upbringing or whatever, to go to him, mate, your missus, when you lock that door, that's where your life is. It's not here impressing these lads. But all these lads have lost touch with, what's important.
I guess combine that with perhaps loneliness, not knowing who to talk to, and if you have got challenges, and you may not even associate them with being mental health related. It may just be that you drink too much or your marriage has broken down. But I guess the important thing is that you speak to someone, right? You share it with someone.
But you've got to have someone to share it with. That's the whole point, right? We become isolated. We separate ourselves from our support groups. We are then reluctant to seek help. And no one's there going, are you okay? One of the things I talk about in all my sessions, so I go into workplaces and I do comedy health awareness, men's health or well-being or wellness. More and more recently, people have got a lot of mental health fatigue. They've been bombarded with it. So now I tend to talk more about mental health and isolation, or mental well-being and behavioural safety, health and safety, that kind of stuff. People don't realise you're going to spend a lot of time on your own, so you've got to be comfortable with yourself. However, if you're not in a good place to be on your own, you need someone to go, is everything all right? So you look pretty presentable, Philip. You look like a clean guy. So if I see you next week in the same clothes and you've got food on you, am I going to say anything? If a couple of weeks' time, your hair's unkempt, you smell, you've got your T-shirt's in a terrible state, am I going to go, are you all right, pal? Or I'm going to start calling you Stinky Phil? Do you see? That's all I'm trying to get to, is getting people to go, well, when did we stop being them kids that cared for each other? And then when did we stop being them people that took an interest in each other?
It is a shift, isn't it? It's a shift in the way that we interact.
The how or why and where? I can't remember the guy's Townsend. He did social research. It's called Community Remembered. Talks all about the golden era of Britain. And his take on it was that if you say to people, was life better 20 years ago? They'll go, yeah. 20 years ago, if you said to people, was life better 20 years ago? They'll go, yeah. But hang on. The people in the 60s said, during the war, it was better. We just have this golden memory that gives us comfort. Well, go out and make those golden memories now, so that in 20 years' time you can go, actually, they were the good days and I didn't realise it.
So we touched on it just a minute ago, actually, and I'd like to ask you about this. So this idea that perhaps men don't help themselves a lot of the time, how do you think, and it's very topical at the moment, how do you think men trying to understand where they sit in society now? There's a lot of terms like toxic masculinity and all this sort of thing, and a lot of it relates to young boys and how they're growing up. But how do you think it relates to older men who are trying to be relevant or trying to just find their way? Where do they sit today? How should they behave?
So I think that there's no such thing as toxic masculinity. That was a term invented by psychologists to explain the behaviour of men in prisons. And it's just become into the kind of social discourse in the same way that, oh, you're ghosting me. Oh, you're toxic. Oh, you're a narcissist. It's nonsense. You just latch onto these words. There is only toxic humanity. There are women who are as toxic as men. And it's nothing to do with your gender, your sex, your upbringing. It's just toxic people, right? People are drains and radiators. You know this expression, you're either giving off the love or you're draining it. In a light-hearted way, I often will mention the problem that we've got as men was that there's no counterbalance to feminism and the Spice Girls. So the Spice Girls came along, girl power, but made us think that boy power was a bad thing. And what that's done is it's created a vacuum where everyone's saying, oh, Andrew Tate's coming, and everyone's listening to him and becoming misogynistic. But it's not. It's just a lot of the time boys don't really understand what's your role. Because traditionally, we went to work with other men, we hung around with other men, socialised with other men, got the girls pregnant, they raised the kids, traditional family, Then industry went and there was nowhere for the men. There's research at the moment about post-war emancipation for women and equality for women, which I'm not against, but it then took away the role for men. Like I say, my eldest boy's 31 and I used to take him to playgroup and I'd be the only man there. And the other women would either look at me like, oh, right, this guy's caring, I'll hump him. Or, what's wrong with him? He's a bit weird. Now my son is 31, he takes his son to playgroup and he's still one of the few men that do it. All right, so, okay, girls, you can now drive cars and build bridges, fine. But can we look after kids, please? And then can other men accept that this is a valid way? You're not demasculated because your wife earns more than you. It's just, what's our roles? Where do we fit in?
Yeah, and there's a chap I interviewed actually from an organisation called Dad La Soul, who is really kind of driving that kind of message forward at the moment, supporting dads and just looking afresh at the role that men play in the family and bringing up children.
They're great. They're a really good organisation. I actually mentioned them because it's all about, look, we've got to somehow, got to make it cool to be a dad. It's ridiculous, right? But it's about changing the kind of whole way that we look at it. In Scandinavia, you can get shared paternity leave, you can take a year off. But in this country, people still think, no, girls do that, boys do that. But we're not raising the boys to think, actually, be a stay-at-home dad. It's a valid and beautiful career.
So where do you start? If you're listening to this thinking, well, this kind of all applies to me and I'm a bit confused. Where do you start? What are your first steps?
First steps, I'll reach out to one of your mates. So are you godfather to any kids, Philip?
Do you know, I'm not actually. No, I'm not.
Do you have kids?
I do, yes. I have 3 children, yeah. And they have godparents. They do have godparents, yes. No one decided to reciprocate, but that's fine. I'm fine with that.
Take the hint, mate. Take the hint. Do you still have contact with the people you chose to be moral guardians for your children?
I do, yes.
And the men who are the godfathers you speak to on a regular basis and you touch base with?
I do, yeah, because we chose them because they're good friends and they still are.
Good. Most men don't do that. All right, he's a godfather. I haven't spoken to him in 35 years. Hang on. Your best man. Do you still talk to your best man? It's that. It's do you reach out? Every day, I try to choose 10 people to send a good morning message to. I'm normally on the toilet, if I'm honest. I just quickly flick through and go, yeah, it's a funny meme. But that's 10 people every day who are going, someone out there. Well, they now know I'm sitting on the toilet while I do it. But they now know that, do it. And if you do 10, 10, 10, 10, it's exponential, isn't it?
Yeah, that's the message, isn't it? It's just look after each other. Doesn't matter, not just men look after men. I mean, we all need to be a bit kinder to each other, right? And look out for each other.
Do you know, I genuinely thought after lockdown, we'd all come out nicer. I really did. I thought we'd be more appreciative, more patient, more understanding, but all it's done is made us angrier.
Well, John, we need people like you who can help diffuse the situation, help bring, comedy to it or help us see things through better lenses than the angry lens. Let me just ask you about, so I know you run an organisation with your partner called Happy to Health You. I wonder if you could just talk briefly about what you do there and how you work with people.
So I have almost like parallel careers, really, where I write and, people pay me to write. And then I do the stand-up comedy clubs, as well as, like I say, on cruise ships. And then because of all this kind of health stuff I do, I set up a company. My partner is a cancer survivor, but she prefers the term woman. So she's a woman who had cancer and through her experiences went and got herself qualified, is now a teaching fellow at a leading university. So she does women's health talks, which are funny. And then I do men's health talks. And then we sometimes do combined, men and women. And then we do the mental health stuff. She does it as well. But she can do it on what it's like being told you've got cancer, how that affects you mentally. And what it did to her was it just made her really embrace life even more than she already was. And then we will then do bespoke projects. So you might go, well, dog walkers are lonely. Well, what can we do to bring dog walks together? And then in doing that, we'd find out actually dog walkers do come together and the dog stops them being lonely. It's not the dog, it's the practice of dog walking. So how do we create that same group without the dogs? Well, we'll start walking groups. Yeah, but what about people who are not able-bodied? Well, then we'll do some groups whereby we can all come together and sit down. So a book club. What about people who can't read? Well, then we'll do... You with me? We don't go, for God's sake. We'll go, well, let's find the next thing. And it's just she has the same zest for life. And we work for people that we like. And we do tend to be... we have no kids at home. So we will very often just say, come on, let's just go away for a weekend. Or let's go see a play. Or let's go to the cinema. Because we've connected with that inner child.
Brilliant. Well, I'll put a link into the website as well, so people can have a look for themselves. But John, thank you so much for spending some time today. I've really enjoyed the variety of conversation that we've had, and yeah, thank you very much.
You know what it is? It's all too serious. We go, if you've got depression, go and get yourself some dopamine enhancers. Get yourself no. Do you know what, mate? You got to learn to live with it. Life doesn't go like that. Life has ups and downs. All I'm trying to do is, for the people who are up here, let's pull these guys up and not Don't push down on people. Be part of the solution, not be a problem. Be an ally. Help. Just reach out to from tomorrow. I'll do 5 guys a day then. Every day, connect with 5 men. Oh, but what about women? Well, let them do that. 5 guys every day, and try to find someone that in your phone book that you haven't spoken to in 5 years. Connect with them, and pretty soon you'll have people in your phone book you haven't spoken to in a week. And then you're back in the game. You're back connected.
Perfect. Thank you. That is the takeaway. That is the call to action from this episode.
Call to action. The Americans would say, choices, man. Make good choices.
Excellent. Thank you. Thank you for listening to the Midlife Men podcast with me, Philip Briscoe. If you want to find out more about John's work, visit his website, happytohelpyou.com, and we'll also add more links in the show notes. If you have a story to tell, you think your experience would help others, then please do get in contact either via the website, mid-lifemen.com, or email me at midlifemen01@gmail.com. If you've enjoyed listening, please do rate and review the podcast. It really helps. And finally, there is a book that I've written called Men Speak Up, Journeys Through Mental Health. And it's based on some of the stories from the podcast and available on Amazon and through other online retailers.